Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Performance Cafe. It's lovely to have you here with me today. And I'm still on my roll about accountability. Firstly, I took accountability for my health and went to gym this morning, and I'm running a little bit late. So that's what the wet hair is about. And if you hear more voices than mine, you're not going stir crazy. We have got workers next door. And yes, so that's who you're hearing. They are apparently co-presenting with me today. So today we're going to talk about self-awareness and accountability, because we've been talking a lot about how do we hold people accountable, but a lot of what happens with holding people accountable is, as we said last time, a fear that things will go wrong, a fear that things will escalate. And when we talk about fear, we understand that we're talking about triggers. And when we're talking about triggers, we're saying, what in a particular situation will I find just too difficult to deal with? And I think I'm in, as you guys know, I do inspired leadership development. And one of the things that we find most frequently is this concept that people are technical experts or project management experts, and they get made people. They get made people. They get to manage people all of a sudden, and no one actually properly, prepares them for that change. And so what we see is that lack of self-awareness actually impacts quite negatively on what they can do with a team and how they build teams and interact with them. So let's quickly just take a step back and say, but what is self-awareness? It is basically to be aware of myself. So I'm objectively able to evaluate myself. Now, why do we say objectively? Objectively, because I need to be able to stand away and go, oh, innocent, you know that triggers you, and you should actually know better by now, right? So I can objectively go and say, if I look from the outside in, I can see where I am going wrong or where I'm doing something rather silly. It also means that once I understand that, I can manage my emotions better. Because if I know that when my neighbor's dog barks, that it ticks me off because then my dogs start barking, then I know that maybe I should just put a plan in place that the moment that happens, I stop my dog from barking instead of actually still getting angry in the process. Because when I get angry and when I get upset, then I shout at the dogs think I'm barking with them, and you can imagine just where that goes. Also, once I am self-aware, I also understand how my values align with my behaviors, and I understand correctly how others perceive me. So I can say, I want to always work from a paradigm of trust and respect, or at least respect, if not even trust. And then when I distrust someone, I can call myself out on it and go, okay, I've just noticed objectively that you actually did not show trust or respect to that person. And you probably did that because you were governed by your emotions. So let's just take a look at what those are and deal with those. And then, right, so now how do I align my behavior with my values? What I do is I go back to that person. I say, I'm so sorry, but I'm not quite happy with what I just did there. My apologies. Can we have that discussion again? I'd like a do-over. I think I could do better. And because of that, you can understand how people see you. I read this most amazing book, and I'm going to forget the name, probably, Inner Mastery, Outer Wisdom by Hitendra Woodwa. And he speaks about Gandhi, and he says about Gandhi that people were amazed that he could speak for hours and address people for hours without notes. And they said it's because what he believed and what he thought, what he said, and what his actions were all consistent. And I think that's what we're coming to over here, is that once we have self-awareness and we understand where we're going at, we can manage ourselves to that type of consistency. And that type of consistency makes it a lot easier for others to work with us. So now I spoke about understanding our values and how we react and how we manage ourselves. And for those of you who sort of have perked up and were waiting for this is the sentence that you've been waiting for, because self-awareness is integral to emotional intelligence. And if we take a look at the Goldman model, then we understand that it starts with self-awareness. It says, who am I? What are my emotions? How do I feel? Now, just before you go, well, that's very easy, I was angry. I think the important thing that we miss is that many of us grew up with a message not to show our emotions. And because we weren't allowed to show our emotions, we couldn't express them, we couldn't process them, we couldn't understand them. They're just this inconvenience, like a little irritating brother or sister that you just sort of ignore or suppress or try and get away from, right? But actually, if I understand, if I can honor that in a moment I feel a particular way, and I understand why I feel that way, I can actually manage that emotion. Remember what I said about the dogs barking? Is I can actually short circuit an angry moment that becomes worse, because I can go, I understand the trigger, I'm self-aware, and I'm going to manage myself. Now, the interesting thing about it is that once I can understand that emotion in myself, I can have empathy for others who have the same emotion. So if I get very depressed and I cry and I want to eat like half a liter of ice cream, which is quite doable, if someone else shows sadness and they show the same thing, or we see it on TV, we actually resonate with that. We have empathy with that because I understand where you are coming from, because I can put myself in your shoes. And then we also understand how to deal with a relationship. So, for example, if you walk up to someone at the office and their eyes are full of tears and you recognize that as sadness, you can actually take them aside and say to them, right, let's go and have a cup of coffee. Let's see what I can help you with, or how I can at least support you through this. So one thing I want to just be sure is a lot of people confuse self-awareness with self-centeredness. Self-centered says it's all about me and my way of seeing the world. That means that I can be aware of what's going on for me, but I won't adjust myself. I won't manage myself. I just let myself go because I'm self-centered. And also, if I'm self-centered, I cannot empathize with other people so that I can manage that relationship and be a support to them. So self-awareness is step one to opening up to others. Self-centeredness says there is no place for others. Right, so what's this got to do with accountability? Well, when we think of accountability, we have to understand where we are coming from. And then we'd like to learn that emotional intelligence to see where other people are coming from. Because you see, when we are intentional with our accountability, we have to understand not just the one thing that's gone wrong, but we've got to understand the whole ecosystem. So I think that there are a couple of ways that we can prepare ourselves, and we should be preparing leaders for taking on and managing teams. Firstly, I think the good question is, who am I? And that's the self-awareness component of it. Self-awareness we can do through one of many projective tests. It is an online IT-driven test. You don't need a psychometrist or anyone fancy for it, but you do need someone to help you debrief and understand what that profile means and how you can use it. So as you know, one of the examples is strengths coaching, which I do, and we do the Clifton Strengths Assessment that gives us 34 strengths that get broken up into 4 domains. Now, to give you an example of how this would work, that is my cell phone that shouldn't be on, my apologies. And so what happens in that particular case is we can then say, right, we've done the assessment. It's a projective test, so it tells me what I think of me. And so firstly, most people don't look at a projective test and go, oh, well, this is all wrong and I disagree with all of it. Then when we're taking a look at that assessment, then we say, because it's not really a test because you can't pass or fail it, it's assessment. What we've got is we can say, right, we've got 34 strengths that break up into the domains of strategic thinking, influencing, relationship building, and executing. Now, why I'm telling you this is, imagine someone comes to you and there's work they haven't done. It would be, and it's caused a calamity, right? It's caused a bit of a of a kerfuffle. It would be vitally important for you to understand, are you a strategic thinker? Are you going to think about how this is going to affect the macro ecosystem? Are you an influencer? Are you going to be concerned with why this wasn't done from a perspective of the vision, the values, that kind of thing? Are you going to be affected as a relationship builder by feeling that this team member has disappointed the system and what the interpersonal implications of that will be? Or are you maybe stronger in the executing domain, where you're going to worry about just that box is not ticked and that there are knock-on consequences for the people afterwards who need that work to get stuff done? Now, this is a very quick run through. Of course, there's a lot of depth and we don't all just belong to one domain. But you can see how that is going to change the approach of where you're coming from. What's even better is if you understand the approach of where they're coming from, especially if you're strong in one domain and the individual is strong in another, then there's a lot of place where you would need to have a lot of meaningful conversation to bring these two into alignment with each other. It's entirely possible, but very often we don't wonder where I'm coming from, where this person's coming from. It just wasn't done, and it blows up and escalates into conflict, or at the worst, or at the least damaging, a lot of discomfort and a lot of potentially politics and stuff. And so if we don't want to use assessments, we can always understand who people are through taking a look at, for example, their values. And that is why it is so incredibly important, not just to do these assessments, but also to just get to know people, spend the social time with them and understand who they are, where they're coming from, what's happening in their life. Because that's the other thing. If I tell you how often we've had people not achieve in business, not because of what's going on in the business, but what's going on at home. And the moment that they didn't have to fake that everything's okay at home, they actually could deal with the process. And they could say, okay, this is really going terribly wrong. How am I going to deal with it? The other thing that you need to know, and need to know at some depth, I think we've all done 1,000 workshops where people use leadership styles. And this is the second area that I think is incredibly important. So let's quickly run through the most prominent. That is transformational leadership. This is a leader with a vision, a big goal, and the point is that that vision is going to be has to be achieved. This is a big picture thinker, so we've got to think about how do they delegate, how do they hand over work to others, how do they convey tasks, that kind of thing. Next, we've got a delegative leader, and the delegative leader tends to hand off everything. We've got to ask ourselves, are the correct things being handed off in the right place? Is the delegation adequate? I was sitting yesterday, I'm doing research, and I was sitting with someone who actually is a leader in the tertiary field and helps students do the statistical research. And I sat there, and after 4 hours, I felt I was dead. And I was like, I'm going to have to reread everything, not because the person wasn't a great teacher, but because this was also new to me. And well, it's not brand new, but it's been a couple of decades. So you've got to ask yourself, that leadership style that I have, is that adequate for the person who's sitting in front of me when I'm delegating? Am I giving enough information? Am I giving too much information? Authoritative leadership, well, I walk in, I say what needs to be done, it needs to be done, I get out. Often we've got to ask ourselves, how much communication backwards and forwards is allowed? How many questions can be asked? Transactional leadership, well, we often just refer to this as management. So it's also very cut and dried. It's about structure and process and less about people necessarily. Participative leadership, that we also know as democratic leadership. Here we've got someone who wants to ask everyone, but we've got to ask ourselves, should everyone be involved in every question? Should everyone be involved in every decision? And what does that, it's great for a participative leader to be happy to give over some of that ownership to others. But, are you also taking away something from someone else who's a leader in their area because you're overriding them with your participative leadership? And then lastly, servant leadership. And I think servant leadership has as many pros as cons. A lot of people feel like, it should be more authoritative, it should be more delegative. But servant leadership really, to me, resonates with where we are in the world now, which speaks to, who are you, where are you at, and how am I going to help you do your best in this company? Because we've now realized that people are not machines, and we can't leave them, we can't have them come in and not understand, not be who they need to be. And I think the thing about this leadership is we've got to ask ourselves, how does that help us hold people accountable? If we take a look at it, transformational leadership might not be great at holding people accountable. So we're great about, providing the vision and the excitement, but this type of manager might be slightly less likely to, do regular check-ins and hold people accountable. On the other hand, we might see someone like a transactional leader being incredibly rigorous about managing the actual, the day-to-day work and the accountability, but they're not really going to be inspiring people. And therefore, they also might not be the most supportive. It's more about the structure and the process than helping people. And so I think, at best, it's good to understand who you are in the process. Next, to understand your leadership style. And then understand from that, what does your support that you provide look like? So let's make this a little practical quickly. I have a little process that I like to have people follow when it comes to accountability. Firstly, remember we said in the beginning, we need to own our emotions. We can't just try and ignore them. So when something does go wrong, step one is I'd like you to start writing down, what am I thinking or choosing to believe about the situation? What am I thinking and choosing to believe about this person? And write down what you honestly, in that moment, feel. What do I think is the impact on the business? And lastly, what's my level of emotional investment? And by emotional investment, I mean, how upset am I right now? And what am I feeling? And, really get to the nuts and bolts of that. Now, obviously, you're not going to share this with people. But the idea is that the moment that you have written this down, we've vented those emotions and to some extent understood them, right? It's not going to be part of the solution, but it is about just unleashing it emotions in a safe space and trying to get just closer to our understanding of why this is triggering us and really take out like the key nuggets of learnings from there. Then on a second page, and this you can show people, you do what I call an intent pulse. You take the pulse of your intention with the following discussion. So the discussion you'll be having. So the first question is, what does the business need? The question here is not how does this impact the business, but what does the business need? What must I really be discussing? Because what also often happens is that once we let rip on one thing, then all of a sudden it's about the problem that the person caused, plus they're coming late, plus the fact that they leave early, and the fact that they are drinking too much coffee and using too much sugar. You understand? So we go into this, well, if I'm going to let rip, let me let rip and get over and done with. We're trying to avoid that. So the question is, what's the one thing that I can discuss? We know the Pareto principle. What's the 20% thing? What's the one thing that's going to cover the 80% that I need to change or that I need this person to change in this situation? Next up, what do I want for myself out of this discussion? And here the question is, so often we will be prepared for conflict. We'll be prepared to get angry, finally going to let this person know. But actually, what do you want for yourself? When you finish with that discussion, how must you feel? Must you feel calm? Must you feel that you adequately communicated? Must you feel that you can show your face in the halls of the business, even in virtual? And must you feel like you could actually face this person again without it being overly burdensome? Next up, what do you want for the other person? Sometimes we get so angry, we forget that this is a person in our team and actually that we have this duty to train and grow and enhance their performance. Often we forget in that moment that, well, we do need their skills. Sometimes we'll forget the 50% or the 70% that they do well because of this one thing that they've done wrong. And so that helps us a little bit with perspective. Do I want to kick this person out immediately? Do I want to actually just show them how this was a problem and help them fix it? Do I want them to take responsibility for fixing it to show maturity and growth in the process? What is it that you want for the other person? And you'll hear, I'm not asking here what the other person wants for themselves. I'm focused on you preparing your intent to bring to the discussion. When you're in the discussion, you can ask the person what they want. But for this preparation, it's about what do you want for them? And then lastly, and I've actually alluded to already, what do you want for the relationship? Is this something that is this a relationship you want to end? Is it a relationship you want to extend? And then let's face it, sometimes when we're in a bit of a huff, a day or two later, we feel very bad about acting without dignity, leaving that person without their dignity. And then we've changed that relationship fundamentally, and we've broken the trust and respect. And that leads to even more work in trying to win that back. So in closing, if we loop back to emotional intelligence, it's only by being self-aware that we can take the content from page 1 where we vent and understand our reaction and understand how best to manage the situation. And then on page 2, where we're doing our intent planning, we can use that to change our reaction in order to best manage the relationship. So we walk into the accountability discussion on a good footing and setting everyone up for success. And I think that allows for us to also keep people in the organization for longer, because we know what it costs to replace someone and all the training and development that we've done. So it's not just good for relationships, it's good for business and for the financial part of it. And so that is it on me and self-awareness and accountability from the Performance Cafe. If you've liked this, please remember that we are streaming across all the major platforms. We've got our Performance Cafe home on YouTube. And then I think time for more coffee. I hope I see you next week at the Performance Cafe.